and her family being groomed for Washington?
Ooh, plus, Caitlin Huey-Burns, she is here with a closer look. There she is at the people who could make up President-elect Trump's cabinet. We are all speculating this morning because that's what we love to do in the media.
That's right.
We love to speculate. Stick with us.
I'm kind of over getting so
Rolling down his choices for leadership roles in his administration. So who are some of his top picks? Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. We've got the chalkboard with some faces. Nice to see you this morning.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
All right, so let's go through some of what we know. Now, none of these have been confirmed yet.
Exactly. None of these have been confirmed. A lot of this is speculative, but we're hearing from the campaign some names that have been being tossed around. And the important thing to remember here is that Donald Trump does not have experience governing. So he's going to be seeking help from some Washington insiders who have been around this game for a long time, while also going outside the political system. So there might be a little mix here.
Okay, let's start with the Treasury Secretary. And if we've got a shaky economy, who do we hear?
Steve Mnuchin has been controlling the Trump campaign's financial team. So he's someone to consider here. There's also talk, though, of Congressman Jeb Hensarling, who has been chairing the House Financial Services Committee. He's been brought up as a name, and so has Jamie Dimon.
Jamie Dimon, right?
Of J.P. Morgan, of course.
All right, Rudy Giuliani. Of course, he was one of Trump's biggest surrogates. Where would he fit?
He has been in the running for Attorney General. Remember, Giuliani has been a very loyal supporter of Trump, and we know that Trump really rewards loyalty and people that he knows. And
what about Trey Gowdy?
Trey Gowdy has absolutely been mentioned, especially his work in the House and on the Benghazi committee. He's become a popular Republican in the House and also someone who's been named for that role. Also, talk of perhaps Jeff Sessions involved in some way.
For this role?
Not quite sure yet, but he's been tossed around for some other things as well.
Another big surrogate, we saw him often here on Fox, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. Where would he?
There's a lot of talk about Newt Gingrich being Secretary of State. He's often been mentioned for that role, as has Senator Bob Corker, who, as we know, chairs the Foreign Relations Committee. And he was, remember, talked about early on as a potential vice presidential candidate. But he's been very involved. So has Ambassador John Bolton, who we know from this show.
You know, I got to say, I don't see a lot of diversity.
Right, exactly. That's something that this
There's a bunch of old white guys.
Exactly. They're going to have to bring in some new faces. Sarah Palin has been talked about.
Now, I saw this the other day, and I think a lot of people thought, really? Is this for real?
She's been talked about as Interior Secretary. There have been other names tossed around, but she's been wanting a job in this administration. She's made clear. It's not clear, though, whether she will be picked.
So Interior Secretary, what does that do? National Park Service?
Right, exactly. And so that could fit her. The position that I'm looking most closely at, and I think is one of the most important decisions the president makes, is Chief of Staff. This is someone who has
one of the most important roles.
One of the most important roles. It's very behind the scenes, and a lot of people don't really know, don't really focus on that. But this is someone who's going to be key in running the president's schedule, making those relationships with Congress. So there are two people that have been in the news being considered. Reince Priebus, of course, who was the RNC chair, still is, has been very key in establishing those alliances with the Republican establishment and party, and that could be very valuable to someone like Trump who doesn't have necessarily those connections. However, there's also talk of Steve Bannon, who was his campaign
from Breitbart
chairman
News.
Of Breitbart News, and that would be an extremely controversial pick, and that would signal that he's not very interested in unifying the party and unifying both parties and establishing some kind of peace and calm on Capitol Hill.
Do you think that's going to happen?
It would it would be very surprising. But we know that he's been very close to Trump, has been advising him throughout this campaign. I think Reince Priebus is someone that everybody in Washington kind of hopes he goes towards.
Somebody else we saw, and obviously he ran against him, but then he came out supporting him, and he was a pretty vocal supporter, was Governor Mike Huckabee.
Yeah, there's some talk about Huckabee being Commerce Secretary. Of course, Huckabee was a former governor, also ran for president a few times. He's been talked about.
What about Kellyanne Conway?
So Kellyanne Conway is someone I envision more in a communications role. Remember, she was the campaign chair. She ran the campaign, but she was very much the messenger and the face of the campaign. So somewhere, maybe not in the cabinet, but somewhere perhaps as communications director, secretary, really being in charge of the message and controlling that message, I think would be a good role for her. Ben Carson has been talked about perhaps as Health and Human Services Secretary, or there's even been talk of him as Secretary of Education. And I would just move him down to this role because that's been talked about most likely, although Trump and other Republicans have talked about diminishing the role of the Education Department. So we'll see.
And finally, Chris Christie, I mean, you know, if you want to drain the swamp in Washington, you've been talking about that as Trump has, and now we know that he's not heading up his transition team. Is he out?
Right. I think it would be very controversial to bring Christie into this administration, given everything that's going on, that has been going on with Bridgegate. Trump ran against a scandal in the White House, and it would be very difficult for him to bring someone in. Governor Rick Scott has been talked about for Health and Human Services before, and you know we still have Michael Flynn as perhaps Defense Secretary.
All right, coming up, playing on the transition team bingo. We'll be playing that later this afternoon. Caitlin Huey Burns, great to see you this morning.
Good to see you too. Thanks.
All right, a third night of anti-Trump protests spreading across the country. Is it time for President Obama to call for calm? David Webb and Danielle McLaughlin are here for a fair and balanced debate. That's next. And it was one of President-elect's favorite targets in the corrupt mainstream media.
I put down failing at New York Times. The newspaper's going to hell. Maybe we'll start thinking about taking their press credentials away from them.
Well, this morning, the Times issuing an unprecedented apology. Wait until you hear what the New York Times is saying this morning.
'Cause I'm missing more than just your body. Oh, is it too late now?
The hour and a quick look at your consumer headlines. The Dow Jones finishing the week of the election on a record high. It closed more than 18,800 points, and this just days after fears that it would plunge after Mr. Trump won the White House. But not such good news for Grubhub. The company stocks sinking 4% just one day after the CEO asked President-elect Trump's supporters to resign, saying he had no place for them. Pete, over to you.
Night of unrest as protests continue across America in response to Tuesday's election. So, is it time for President Obama to call for calm? Here to debate, it is radio talk show host and Fox News contributor David Webb and Democratic strategist Danielle McLaughlin. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Ladies first. So, is it time for the president to stand up and say enough is enough?
I think the president has a role to play here. Absolutely. He is still the president through January 20th. I think Donald Trump also has a role to play in terms of speaking to the people who are out there on the streets protesting the fact that he has become the president-elect. I think that's going to, both people here have a role to play.
But who has a more significant role?
Well, Obama is the president, and so I would say that it is him. A couple of days ago, Donald Trump came out and said he didn't regret any of the divisive rhetoric that he had used in this campaign. And, you know,
So is Trump to blame for these protests then?
I think that civil disobedience, that this is a First Amendment right, the right of speech, the right of assembly is absolutely a constitutional right. We have to respect it.
All right.
But burning cars is not in the Constitution.
David, to that point, burning cars not in the Constitution. You followed these very closely. What are you seeing?
Neither is marching down 6th Avenue, blocking traffic, hindering people, hindering commerce. Let's look at what this is. Obama's not going to call for calm. Why? They had MoveOn.org and other organizations had celebrations planned if Hillary Clinton won. She didn't win. So basically they flip the switch and they go to protests. The protests turn into riots. Properties destroyed. We now have one person shot in Portland. And I've been tracking these. It's no different than what happened after 2008. Oh, yes, it is. That's right. There were no marches, no riots by the Tea Parties. This is a problem. The leftists have lost. They have been rejected by the American people. Donald Trump, yes, he's already made it clear that, this is our process, this is how it works. He doesn't play a role. Obama won't play the role because it doesn't serve his purposes. Sure. Hillary Clinton, who insulted her supporters by not coming out and speaking to them the night she lost the election, because they're beneath her. They're just energy for the leftists. Let's not kid ourselves. I've got people working in these protests, walking now in Portland, and I'm telling you what's going on and who's in charge.
How much of these, though, to that point, how much of these protests are a simmering Bernie factor, too? The fact that the left rejected the candidate they really wanted in Bernie Sanders, and so they're rejecting Donald Trump, who they don't like, but they're also rejecting what they feel like is a system that never included them. It's
hard to say. I want to go back to your point about impugning Hillary Clinton and all of this. I think that she showed grace and really said to the American people, this is a time to get behind Donald Trump. I think there is a Bernie part in here. I think there are certainly progressives within the Democratic Party who want to see kind of burn down the party now because we didn't succeed where we thought that we really might. I think we also need to have as a part of this conversation, the fact that maybe if it had been a Marco Rubio or a Ted Cruz, that maybe we wouldn't have seen this. And we have to see.
The Republicans don't have a role in what the leftists do. You can't take the left and the progressive left that have taken over the Democrat Party and blame the Republicans for their actions.
I think we have
it's
to acknowledge that
foolish
Trump
and
is
it
a
makes no
different kind of a
sense.
candidate.
But this is not Donald Trump's issue. He's not out there ginning up the marches and leading the protesters to